Welcome. Good morning. Kind of a dismal Hamilton day, but what a great turnout for our first vital conversation in Hamilton. We're going to talk about cycling this morning. I'm Terry Cooke, CEO of the Hamilton Community Foundation. I'm going to introduce our two panelists in a couple of minutes. But I just wanted to start by, first of all, welcoming all of you here. And secondly, just to provide a bit of context, because one of the things we do as a community foundation is promote the dissemination of knowledge and the engagement of citizens to try and make this a better place. You would maybe be familiar with our Vital Signs report. If you're not, you can pick up a copy of the spec edition on the back counter. It really is a report card, a scorecard on how Hamilton is doing on about 10 different criteria, everything from the arts to public health to safe streets. And we thought if we were going to have these conversations, which also build off of our TV show, that this would be a really neat starting point because in our view, the notion of complete streets and the role that cycling plays in providing a comprehensive transportation system is critical to our future. And with apologies to the folks from the City of Hamilton here, and I once upon a time had an association with the City of Hamilton. I guess I do again as of last week, being the unofficial first dude now of Ward 1. We need to be more ambitious, and that'll be part of the conversation here today. And quick backdrop, a lifetime ago when I was a very junior councillor in Ward 1 in the City of Hamilton, first elected in '85, I had this crazy notion that we should develop a comprehensive cycling plan for the region, and I convinced our regional council at the time to do two things. One was to take 1% of our capital budget annually and devote it to cycling infrastructure, and the second was to develop a comprehensive region-wide cycling plan. And Ryan knows a bit of this story, but we did some really good things out of that, like the early development of the rail trail system in Hamilton. But the part that is often forgotten is we also convinced regional council at the time to do a pilot project on Main and King from McMaster to downtown, take a lane of traffic out and do a dedicated cycle path. And that lasted all of about 4 months. There were a couple of accidents because it was a poorly designed pilot. The Spectator put one of the accidents on the front page, and my regional council majority collapsed like a cheap card table, and they were taken out, and frankly we lost decades in terms of the progress, because had we stayed the course, I think we would have been the best mid-size cycling city in the country. And frankly I take responsibility for that, because we hadn't built the coalition of the willing to sustain support as change happened, and that of course is a lesson for LRT. But with that backdrop, let me introduce our two guests this morning, and here's how it's going to work. I'm going to moderate. These two folks are passionate cyclists, and I think bring both some expertise and some knowledge of advocacy and how change happens to the discussion. I'm going to ask 2 or 3 softballs off the top, and then we're going to open it up to conversation. And the only thing I would urge is, given the size of the crowd this morning, if you can keep your questions kind of short and pointed, and then we'll hopefully have a good stimulating conversation. So to my immediate left, I want to introduce Kate Whalen, who in her day job is a faculty member at McMaster and working on her PhD, but she's here today as the co-chair of Cycle Hamilton. Her bio says she came here in 2009, gave up her car in 2011, and is a passionate year-round cyclist. So I think she brings great backdrop to the question at hand. And the ubiquitous Ryan McGreal, editor of Raise the Hammer, resident of Kent Street, where I grew up, and somebody that is also a passionate advocate for complete streets, for LRT, and obviously for cycling. So with that as a backdrop, let me just start with kind of a direct question, which is, in my view, we have not been nearly ambitious enough. We call ourselves the ambitious city, but when you think about the change that's happening demographically, the number of young people that are embracing the notion of complete streets and who want to cycle safely all the time, I'm a guy who has taken my kids to ride bikes in mid and large-sized cities all over North America, and inevitably come back feeling a sense of lament that we have gone too slowly, and frankly, even when we've done stuff, we've done it in a half-assed way. And I say that with a lack of subtlety. What do we need to do to put some momentum and some real resolve into creating a better and safer community for people to cycle all the time? Start with you.
Thanks, Terry. Great question. I will say first and foremost, we have a cycling master plan. It's a good plan. We've outlined the streets that we want to tackle in the near and long term. We haven't been putting the money, the investment into implementing it. The Cycle Master Plan calls for an investment of $2.5 million annually to get it done. We've been underspending by about $1 million each year. So we're not getting done fast enough. And to your point, it makes it really hard to get around when you don't have a robust cycling network.
Same question.
In 2009, I remember you writing an op-ed for the Spectator, and you pointed out that the pyramids were built faster than the schedule for Hamilton's cycle plan, and that was if we built. I
guess with a spouse now in elected office, I may have to be more discreet in my op-ed writing, right?
A little more circumspect, maybe. Yeah. But and in fact, that was based on the assumption that we actually spent according to the plan, which we haven't. I mean, for several years we were spending considerably less than $1 million a year. We've increased it now in significant part because the province, in their dying gasp, shoveled a bunch of money to cities to invest in cycling infrastructure, but that's about 2 years worth of money, and then after that it's going to be back onto us again. I agree entirely with Kate. I think we need, not in the summer when we're talking about projects, but in the winter when council is talking about budgets, that's when they need to actually allocate that money. But the other thing we need to do is build a broad-based organization that is actually going to be generating the political context that makes that kind of investment inevitable. And that's why I'm so glad that Cycle Hamilton exists, because before that, there were a lot of cycling advocates, but there wasn't a network. There wasn't a kind of an organizational structure around that. And I think what we saw with the organizers of the Yes We Can campaign, bringing together thousands of people to create a physically protected two-way cycle track on Cannon Street. I mean, when that was first proposed, it was considered ludicrous, and then it was very quickly became inevitable. And I see that as the template that Cycle Hamilton is following, and I'm very excited about how we're going to be able to get better at doing that in the future.
So, Kate, talk to us about advocacy, public policy, and change, because that's a world you live in, and obviously that is that's a commitment and a network that we need to get better at executing on.
So at Cycle Hamilton, we have a mission for Hamilton to become the best place for anyone to get around by bike. So that includes levels of ability, age, background, experience, things like that. And we have 3 goals. We want to get more people on bikes. We want to shift that modal split. We want to get more and better protected bike lanes. We want a robust network. And we want to create a culture of cycling in Hamilton. And so around generating that political will and that advocacy piece, one of our most recent projects was leading up to the municipal election. We sent a survey to all candidates. We had a 76% response rate. It was come in this fact as an election issue, which was great to hear. And what we heard loud and clear, first and foremost, the candidates said that they would put money towards implementation of the Cycle Master Plan, and they also said they were in favor of immediate implementation of Vision Zero. So that was really important to us. And so we also helped residents lead 7 ward rides across the city. We had 66 residents attend those. We had 30 candidates between the municipal and the trustees, 5 of which actually were elected. So now we have a template to say thank you, to reach out to your counselor, and that's where the network comes in. It's not just the people at Cycle Hamilton, it's every member, it's every person who cares about safe and more cyclable and walkable streets to reach out, congratulate, comment, say this is important to us, and that's part of what we're doing now.
Fantastic. Ryan, last moderator's questions. One of the things that drives me crazy before we open it up to the audience about Hamilton's endless debates about stuff that should have been resolved years ago is this notion of Hamilton's exceptionalism. And inevitably when it comes to cycling, what you will hear And I recently had some experience going door to door and was reminded of the tenor of the conversation. Well, we're different. So don't tell me about Portland or Montreal or New York City. We have an escarpment. We have cold weather. We have heavy industry that has to move big trucks. So we can't take the lessons of those other communities and amend and nuance and create a template that works here. Talk to me about that in the context of Hamilton.
Sure. Well, the good news is that Hamilton, this idea of Hamilton exceptionalism, we're not exceptional, and we're also not exceptional in believing we're exceptional. So, so every city, every time the community tries to do something innovative and progressive, there is always pushback. That couldn't possibly work here. This isn't Portland. This isn't Montreal, where it's flat and the weather is always warm. Cycling is never going to work here. So for a long time, it was an uphill struggle to try and say, look, Hamilton is like Minnesota in the sense that we have winters. In fact, theirs are quite worse. Hamilton is like Trondheim, Norway, because in the sense that they have big hills. But the good news now is that we can actually point to success stories in Hamilton of projects that work in Hamilton. So we don't have to tell people, hey, look at this other city that's doing these things. We can say, look at these things that we're doing here and how successful they are, and let's do more of them. So I think that changes the conversation. You can point to Cannon Cycle Track and say, there's 1,000 bike trips a day on a street that had 0 bike trips a day 3 years ago. That's a success story.
And Kate, last one to you before we would open it up. I want you to speak briefly about the notion of transportation justice.
Transportation, I'm going to define that first. So transportation justice, just so everybody's on the same page, that would be the notion that all people of all communities have the same access to safe, reliable, accessible, affordable transportation so that they can access things like jobs, goods and services, affordable housing, social networks, all of those types of things. And it would be silly to think that all people have access to a car to get to where they want to go. And in fact, about 30% of people don't have a car because of age, ability, or cost. So if we wanted transportation justice, we would prioritize and invest in those types of transportation options that give all Hamiltonians access to those really important things that would enable our city to thrive and the people within it to really flourish.
Thank you both. It's now your opportunity to comfort the afflicted or afflict the comfortable, as it were. Who wants to go first? You're not a bunch of shrinking violets. Jamie.
Oh, you want me to?
Yeah. What, you just think you're going to enjoy your coffee and kind of have a little snooze there? Come on.
I did, yes. So we've got a new council, and as Kate, you indicated with the Cycle Hamilton survey, the majority of people sitting on council are supportive of cycling and Vision Zero. So you get a meeting with a councillor tomorrow. What are the 2 main asks that Cycle Hamilton's putting forward?
It's a great question. We've actually been thinking about this exact question. So, and we've been encouraging other people to think about this as they reach out to their counselors, because that's the idea, is we want to start a dialogue on this topic and maintain the momentum that we've generated through our survey and through our ward rides. But I would say, first and foremost, we have the 2.5 number. We need to catch up on that, but the $2.5 million investment in the first budget, have that line there, make the investment, make the commitment, I would say first and foremost, because then the implementation of the plan follows. If we have the money, we already have the design, we have momentum, we have support for these things, I would say that would be first. And the second one, the support for Vision Zero was fabulous. The fact that we asked, would you support the immediate implementation of Vision Zero? And people said yes. They gave us 5s on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, being strongly agree. And so to do that, we need a plan. And I would say off the bat, we have other examples to follow. We have a lot of information on what we can do. I would say first and foremost, get a plan that's an easy win to start the momentum of actually doing something about Vision Zero.
Ryan, same question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I wanted to kind of jump on the Vision Zero a little bit, just in case anybody's not sure what that means. It is a shift in the philosophy of how to approach safe streets. The traditional way of designing streets is sort of saying, pedestrians go over here, we'll put some signage, we'll put some pavement markings, and we'll tell people to be careful. And when people do sort of human things, which we all, are careless and reckless and distracted and tired, and we're, all the various different reasons why people aren't always perfect drivers or walkers or cyclists, when somebody makes a mistake, we decide who to assign blame to. And so the problem with that is that it makes serious collisions and injuries and fatalities inevitable, because it is based on the assumption that if people are careful, they won't get hurt. And we know that people aren't always careful. So if you look at how the industrial workplace approaches safety, that idea of train and blame, education is like the last thing that you do in the hierarchy of controls. The first thing you do is you redesign the system so that it's inherently safe. So that when people make mistakes, not if, but when, those mistakes don't result in tragedy. And so Vision Zero is that industrial health and safety philosophy applied to public spaces. And that's a change in mindset that our strategic documents need to incorporate, that the way city staff approach design projects needs to incorporate, that the public needs to understand, and that council needs to provide support and cover to make sure. So that change is kind of starting to happen. City staff are sort of starting to talk about Vision Zero, but there's still a lot of, getting drivers to sign pledges, which, is not harmful, but it's also not Vision Zero. So I think we really need to get more of a push on that.
Cameron.
So downtown is seen as a really cycling-friendly place, and knocking on doors, I can say sure, generally speaking, but there's a huge gulf still to sort of meet. People who are convinced cycling is good and bike lanes are good, and then a group who aren't. I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to say this for any type of provocative reason. What I want to ask you though is, whose responsibility is it, and how do we bridge the gulf? Is it education? Is it the city's responsibility? I spoke to people who literally have their porch on a bike lane, right facing a bike lane in Herkimer, for example, who would say, no one ever uses the bike lane. While during our conversation, 25 people use the bike lane, right? So data doesn't work, right? Really, for everybody. Whose responsibility is it to bridge the gulf, and how are we doing this?
I think there's a lot of roles to play: cycle advocacy, the work that our local journalists are doing, but also the city as well. And we hear this a lot. People aren't using the bike lanes. One of the reasons is that bikes are smaller and they're not as visible, so we aren't impacted as much as we are when we see a truck or a car go by. So our perception is reduced. But also, we still build lanes that all people don't want to use, right? So we build a lane that is a little section, and not all people will use that. Imagine we built roads like that, like a little piece in Dundas, a little strip over in Ancaster, and then we said, why aren't people using them? And so that's a connectivity problem. But there's also a safety problem in that there's real and perceived safety. We can have a transportation book that said this design is safe. The true measure is if people actually use it. And that could be because it's really not safe, or it could be perceived safety. So if we want to build routes that everyone will take, a good litmus test, look at a lane and ask yourself, would I let a child ride on this? If no, there's a good reason why more people aren't adopting the type of infrastructure. So there is education, there's design, there's advocacy, there's connectivity. There's a lot of pieces, and I think that it's not an easy fix.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess the other thing is that you're never going to get everybody to agree to anything. And so we have to stop this idea that, well, we don't have 100% consensus, therefore we can't move forward. There are going to be some people who are not going to like the idea before it's built, and there's going to be some people who don't like the idea after it's built. But on Herkimer and Charlton, and I'm going to give some credit to the city, because it was a long process that involved a lot of back and forth between city staff and the Kirkendall and Durand neighborhood neighborhood associations, and I got really impatient during this like 2 or 3 year process where they were going back and forth on iterative design changes. But what staff did was they went and they engaged meaningfully with all of the stakeholders. So they talked to the hospital, they talked to waste management and garbage collection, they talked to the street cleaners, they talked to the snow clearing, and they got sign-off on all of the key stakeholders. And so when the Prince of Westcliff came out and said, oh, the hospital doesn't like this. Actually, here's a statement from the hospital saying that they support it. Well, garbage collection's not going to work. Actually, we talked to garbage collection, and this is what they said. So they did their homework. They anticipated all of those objections and all of those kind of obstructionist tactics, and they were prepared with good answers. And that's a wonderful template, I think, to go forward. I think they were supported by the fact that the 2 local councillors had their back and were willing to stand up for them. It doesn't matter how great our staff are, if a councillor in an area doesn't support a good infrastructure, you're not going to get good infrastructure there.
So, to the same question, Cameron, first person narrative. We lived at the corner of Bay and Herkimer when our kids were just born. We ultimately decided to move from a house that I loved more than the one I'm in now when we had a fatal right at the end of the driveway as I was loading my kids into the car. And when I talk to people now who are losing their minds about kind of an innovative way to provide a safe path for cyclists and, frankly, a safer path for pedestrians, I think you have no idea of what the actual experience is on the ground living there. The entire experience is improved dramatically. And when we think about it, that's a 6-block stretch from Queen Street to the hospital. And all we usually used to have was people trying to fire through the synchronized lights so they could save half a minute to get to the Central Mountain. And at the end of the day, what are we prioritizing for? So I give the councillors and the city full marks on thoughtful implementation and extensive consultation. And like Ryan, at the end of the day, we don't get unanimity on anything when it comes to progressive public policy. At some point, it takes courage and a resolve to do things and deal with the fact that not everybody's going to be happy. Now, on the downside, I'd contrast that with Bay Street, where the city had some found money, made a commitment to do something, and then in sections of that cycle lane, they protected it and signed it and did all that. And then in others, for no coherent reason that I can figure out, it's not protected. And consistency matters. And I would point you to the cultural trail in Indianapolis, where everything from the signage to the lighting to the treatment of the road surface is at the highest standard. It's attractive, it's understandable, and has been broadly embraced across city and suburb as a huge quality of life improvement for everybody. And I think we need to think about that. In the back, Chris McLaughlin, could you take off that funny hat? Because I didn't quite recognize you. Geez, you're a handsome man. Now go ahead and ask your question.
So riding around this summer with my 15-year-old daughter was very instructive. To your point about perceived safety, as we rode all the way from the escarpment to the bay, all the length of Bay Street, for example, and her real-time feedback about, well, this feels great. Oh, I don't like how this feels. I'm going to get off and walk this block. I've been encouraging her to write to all of the new counselors. She's that kind of kid, and she has a question for you. She wants to know what to say that matters to them. I explained to her about being 15 as opposed to me writing the letter, and how impactful it could be. And the problem, of course, is that 15 is about the time when most people stop riding bikes. And so that's her question. She wants to know what to say.
I would say go to cyclehamont.ca. We have a template of a letter to use that you can download and adapt. But to your point about what do you say to the counselor that's going to resonate with them, that's where our survey comes in. So we've taken the 74 some odd responses that we've received. We removed all the ones that or we've filtered out the ones that were elected. So you can see every counselor's response to the questions. You can see what they said about our question Division 0. We asked 5 Likert scale, strongly agree, and then we asked 5 open-ended. So you can see verbatim what they said. So bringing in that, when I sent a note to my counselor-elect, I brought that. I said, when you said this, that was really important to me. I would love to work with you on how we can do this. And so you're off to a starting point when you have something to connect. And I think that's a great question about what do you say to each counselor. So I would say look at the survey and download our template. And we also have a list of emails, because right now they're counselor elects, right? So that was one thing I struggled with, like, what email do I use? So we also have a list of emails for each one. Oh, there's one.
Oh, yeah, and the other thing I guess I would maybe add is, as a 15-year-old, she'll be old enough to vote in a few years, and she'll be voting for the next 60 or 70 years after that. So this is the kind of person that the city wants to retain. We have somebody who lives in Hamilton and presumably wants to live in a city where she's able to enjoy a high quality of life. And if we don't provide that, our young people are going to leave and go to other places. I've got a similar situation, with my kids. I worry about them not seeing a future for themselves in Hamilton if we don't get these things right.
Yep.
So there's been this problem on Bay Street recently where anytime there's traffic or an accident west of Bay, police start putting traffic into Bay with like lanes without any warning, without any signage, without telling drivers what to do. And I've been having a hard time tracking down a concrete answer about whether they can do that or who's accountable when an accident occurs, because an accident will occur with that, because the cars also freak out when they get that free lane and go whipping down the street. But then there's also physical planter barriers that can't do. So they then have to merge back in, but it's protected, so they can't really do that, and it ends up making it really unsafe for everyone. Is anyone working on a centralized database of the specific bylaws and or larger federal statutes governing what can be done with bike lanes and stuff like that, so that citizens have some sort of recourse to hold the city accountable when something bad happens?
So I'm not a lawyer, but my general understanding is that a police officer on the scene has broad jurisdiction to make decisions about safety and traffic flow. So I don't think you can sort of say you're not allowed to do this because of this this legislation. The argument is more you shouldn't do it because of these safety reasons, and maybe some leadership from the Police Services Board to say to the Hamilton Police, look, let's stop doing this. I think probably the policy side is you're going to have a better chance of success than trying to tell the police what is and isn't illegal or legal for them.
Right. John, and then Candy.
So, Ryan, you talked about the physical, deviations in the structure of how we build certain things within the city. Then you talked about education, those being the two polar opposites. So how do we have people doing things on the physical side as well as start to bring up that education so that we meet somewhere in the middle? Who does that? How is it done? And is there stuff being done about it?
It's a good question. I'm going to suggest that we take a few lessons from the city of New York under former Mayor Bloomberg. He brought in Jeanette Sadek-Khan as his director of the Department of Transportation with a really strong mandate to get aggressive about making New York streets safer and more inclusive for everyone. And that included a lot of really innovative and really well-designed cycling infrastructure. The design of the Herkimer and Charlton bike lanes that are parking protected, that is a design that we borrowed from New York. Although New York tends to put in physical curbs as well, we sort of did it with paint. And I think there's an opportunity to revisit that and do it a bit better. But one of the things that New York was really aggressive about, and it's because Mike Bloomberg is a data guy, his saying was, in God we trust, all others have to bring the evidence. And so what the city would do is before they started a project, they would measure everything. They would measure flows of people walking, people driving, people biking. They would do business economic analysis of businesses adjacent to the street. They would talk to people. They would have lots of public meetings. They would do lots of engagement and get a real baseline. Then they would take a pilot project approach where they would try things out. They would, be a little bit, they'd revisit after a few months, see what's working, make some tweaks, make some design changes, continue to measure as they went. And then after 6 months and after a year, they would have a follow-up that actually would tell you, okay, this is the real evidence about all the things that changed, and this is the outcome of all the engagement we had. When you do that, and you have that information and you communicate it, education becomes very easy. If you don't take a baseline, then you don't know how things have improved. So I think we need to get really better at committing to collecting data up front, engaging meaningfully with the community on an ongoing basis, having an iterative approach, and then reporting back to the community when we're finished.
And for trivia fans, if you read Jeanette Sadiq Khan's book, Street Fight, they talk about tactical urbanism and use an example from Hamilton, Ontario. Intersection of Locke and Herkimer, where a bunch of bandits went out in the middle of the night and redesigned the intersection because the city wasn't moving quickly enough. I don't know any of those people. Thankfully, I don't think any of them are in the room. Warren Corral. I'm really encouraged to see a retired cop out of bed this early in the morning. I want you to know that.
So I've been very fortunate to do some traveling in Europe and some great LRTs in every big city there. But I've noticed also coupled with their LRT is very good biking infrastructure that goes along with it. And you probably answered this question to everybody in the room, and I wasn't there, but do we have a plan with our LRT to incorporate bike lanes?
Yeah, and can I build on that? The great question, Warren. The other question I have is there have also been arguments advanced politically that we can't make any interim changes until LRT, which God knows, even with full speed ahead, would be 6 or 7 years from completion. So speak to Warren's question about how do we integrate both. I'm going to ask Kate to do this. And then also, what about the kind of the inertia of, well, there's a big change coming, so therefore we shouldn't do little things in the meantime?
So I'll actually leave all the nitty-gritty LRT details to Ryan about the plan. He is a resident expert. But I will say that, LRT is going to disturb a lot of our city for a long period of time. But what a great opportunity for cycling. This is an opportunity to see cycling as the upgrade. And we know about behavior change that, for teenagers, when it's walking or cycling is the upgrade. It's great to mobilize and develop behavior change. Cycling might just be our next upgrade when other things are being disturbed while we implement LRT.
Yeah, I mean, there's Naomi Klein's book about the shock doctrine. Maybe we can take a page from that and say, with this huge project going in, one of the things is that we need to figure out how to accommodate some displaced car trips during construction. Cycling is a wonderful way to accommodate a lot of those trips. More than half of car trips in Hamilton are under 5 kilometers, which is a distance that you can easily ride on a bike. In terms of the LRT and cycling infrastructure, Metrolinx has committed that we will end up with cycling infrastructure that's at least as good as what we have today, and preferably better. I don't think that's a really exciting goal for them, and there are some real problems. So there's a few opportunities. For example, on York Boulevard, so the Cannon cycle track is pretty nice. You're physically protected two-way cycle track. Then you get to Hess and Queen, and the cycle track peters out, and now you have a buffered, painted bike lane on York, which is better than nothing, but not nearly as good. You've got transport trucks going by at 70 kilometers an hour, and you're being protected by magical paint. So I think we can do a lot better there. And Metrolinx is very open to, as part of the funding envelope for LRT, extending the protected cycle track all the way to Dundurn, basically on the south lane of York Boulevard. So that's an opportunity to really improve that connection. Then you get to Dundurn, and now we've got some problems because a lot of the car traffic that's being displaced off of Queen Street, the assumption is that it's going to travel down Cannon, make a right turn on Dundurn, a left turn on Dundurn, and then a right turn on Queen Street and get on the highway. So the problem is then you're going to have a quite large number of cars traveling southbound on one lane of Dundurn. So the city's LRT director is talking about, well, maybe we take out the bike lanes on Dundurn and use that space to have an extra southbound car lane. So there's a lot of pushback from the community, rightly so, on that, because I think it's a terrible idea. And if they do take out the bike lanes, that means we'd be removing cycling infrastructure. So there's some opportunities, for example, to turn Breadalbane or Breadalbane, I don't want to get in the middle of that war, to turn that into a neighborhood greenway, which would connect to the cycle track on the Queen Street going across the bridge, the overpass going across the 403. So we've sort of been pushing back on the city, and they're kind of at a position now. They're saying, well, we'll monitor traffic volumes, and if the traffic volumes consistently exceed a certain threshold, then we'll talk about taking out the bike lanes. I still don't think that's good enough. I think we need, in a way, LRT advocates have been afraid to push back too hard on this, I think, because the sort of small, angry anti-LRT gang has seized on every excuse to try and undermine support for the project. So we've been so busy fighting against that kind of rear guard that we haven't had enough time to focus on, let's fight to make sure that when we build this, we make it as good as we can for as many people as possible. So hopefully with the election results we just had, we'll be able to focus our energy on actually aiming to make this better.
Candy, you've been patient.
This is building on a few questions and what you just said. So, working with Gala and Beasley and Martin Hamilton, one of the most effective tools for myself and the residents is to have a map. You know, in our case, it's often a physical map. People at a community center walk up and put dots or write things on Post-it notes. Is there an online version of that? Because I believe in offering solutions, and when enough people agree on something, it often tends to go through. So in certain areas, you know, where the bicycle lane ends at James Street, you know, like, what are the alternatives? What can we suggest? What can we add to a map? And Chris's daughter, for instance, can say, you know, hey, this is where I didn't feel safe, and this is why. Things like that. Is there something like that that we can, you know, virtually post-it note online?
I would say, not that I know, but do you know of anyone?
I know the city had a thing a few years ago. It was an online map where you could sort of put a pin on it and identify an area that where you saw there was a problem or an opportunity. I'm not too sure if anything ever happened with that or if it's still active, but I think it's a really, really good idea. And if it doesn't exist, we should work on trying to make it happen.
Yeah. We have 3 major projects coming up, and one of them is actually a bike map app. Playing with ideas, map the gap, map the cycling. There'll be hopefully some sort of app where you can go and you can say, this road's great, there's a problem here. Also, this is a really, really good connection. We're just looking at the technology, looking at the GIS mapping and what tools that we can bring in and what our resident experts can work with in their timeline. But we hope to have a tool like that. It will be for cycling, but I assume that the applications will be broad enough to incorporate other issues as well.
But before the app, it would be great just to have a map, just to get people's, like I said, virtual post-it notes stuck on there, just to bring up certain points. Because you don't necessarily know, because everybody does their own routes, right?
Yeah.
But when you connect it all, it becomes connected, which is what we're all talking about, right? Because it doesn't actually get connected at the moment.
For sure. Alyssa.
History has told us that progress is really slow when it comes to implementing cycling infrastructure. So my question is, as the advocacy continues, what would you suggest is the attitude that residents should have to continue fostering this cycling culture that we all have while we wait for progress to happen and while advocacy continues?
I think a good start again is coming back and reaching out to the councillors elect and the candidates who are going to be in those seats, but also, and everybody's going to interact with cycling, and we want people to get on their bikes. We know that people come with different experience and skills and abilities, and so I think that if you're new to cycling, you're not sure, great opportunities. Go out on one of the off-road trails to build your skills and your confidence. Join a group ride, Sobe, Friendly Streets, Cycle Hamilton, Bike to Work Day by Smart Keep. There's so many group rides. It's a really great introduction to get out cycling on streets. I know for me, luckily my neighbor was Justin Jones, and when I was getting into cycling, I would bike around the Bayfront to work, and I was fine with that. But when it came to, say, doing groceries or going downtown, he was my bike buddy, and he knew, and he kind of showed me me how it goes and what to do on the road, and then it gave me the confidence to do it on my own. So I would say get out there and bike and demonstrate that people will use the lanes and will use the infrastructure. Tell your counselors, but there's a ton of different ways to get involved. Again, like Cycle Hamilton's a member-based organization. You can become a member of us, come out to one of our meetings. We even lead group rides to each one of our meetings, and we're kind of going around to different wards. So I would say, just keep biking and keep the conversation going.
And I would say that, but in terms of the attitude, I think we need a sense of urgency and also a ton of patience, which is a little bit contradictory. But as cycling advocates, I think we also need, and this is something that I sometimes struggle with, but we need to have a bit more compassion and a bit more empathy, and to recognize that, while we may be, I've been riding a bike in mixed traffic year-round for my entire adult life. But for a lot of people, it is a very foreign, very scary, very strange idea. And I think we need to be really sort of, in some ways, more patient with people who don't get it, and not to say, like, why are you so stupid? Why don't you get it? And understand that there are sort of some good reasons for people not to get it, and really try harder to meet people where they are and bring them with us, rather than kind of figure that we can shout at them until they agree with us, because that apparently doesn't work.
Yeah. And as only former elected official on the panel, let me say persistence matters. Don't be afraid of repetition, because oftentimes for elected official, you need to repeat the message multiple times. And most importantly, I used to often say that I didn't need friends that would hold my coat when a fight breaks out. I actually needed them to be in the fight with me. And I think for this constituency, not demeaning or diminishing folks who don't understand or having trouble with the adjustment, so being respectful in that conversation, but also showing up, and never underestimate the importance of delegating thoughtfully and persistently with your elected officials, because over time I've found that they notice who's there week in and week out, and who stays the course as changes happen, and it is inevitably as backlash and kickback to changes unfold. You need to be articulate and vocal and in the fight with them. Ken?
Yeah, so I've watched cycling in Westdale around McMaster, I'm not going to say explode, increase a lot over the past 10 years. McMaster is a huge pool of people who mostly don't have cars, are young and healthy, and are seem like a pool of potential cyclists. I haven't seen a lot of direct, specific engagement with McMaster, with the student union, in terms of cycling infrastructure in the city. And there seems to be the 403 is almost like an invisible barrier. That's where a lot of the students stop. What's McMaster's role in all of this? How do we engage with the university? Because I'm not just looking at the students as like a battery and chain that we can harness. I mean, this is good for them, good for the city, good for the university, and yet I don't see anything happening, but I could be wrong.
One thing we could do is put a polling center at McMaster when we have an election. 25,000 people who have the right to vote here. I mean, why? When I was looking through the polling results, there were polling centers that had 10 votes, and I don't begrudge that a bit. But we need to do a lot more to engage with McMaster. I think there's a lot of people, including Kate, including Dave Heidebrecht. And there's a lot of people at MAC who are eager to engage with the city and eager to share their expertise and their energy and enthusiasm. As a city, I think we need to be a little bit less afraid of McMaster and a little bit more willing to recognize that we would benefit from engaging with them as well.
Kate, is the resident McMaster voice on the panel?
I'm slightly biased, but no, I agree. And one of the most recent things, I think like last month, Smart Commute has established a formal connection with the university again. And historically, I think it was in 2010, Maclean's wrote an article and dubbed McMaster as one of the 5 top cycling schools in Hamilton, and in that article, it mentioned our collaboration with the city. And at that point, we actually had a bike lane through Sterling. It was back before Cannon, before Bay, and we were actually doing really well comparatively. We also had winter maintenance. We had secure bike storage. We'd receive fundings through grants. And as things have changed and leadership and connections have moved on, that relationship has changed as well. And we realized that as we're exploring what works, what doesn't, we've realized that the smart commute connection, which is a great connection kind of between the city and the university, and that's their role. Their role is to work with major employers on how to make it easier to get around by sustainable modes as possible, and work with the staff, or in our case, the students and faculty as well, on how to get them to and from, especially using bike is a great one, and we've been focusing on that, but more recently, and I'm excited to see that there hopefully will be some changes to come. The university's at the table, the student unions at the table, HR is at the table, so I think some good things will come.
We have time for about 2 more quick ones. Somebody in the back? Yep, fire away.
Yeah, Glenn Doe is my name. I just wanted to emphasize that LRT, that the use of the LRT construction as a way of promoting cycling, I think is a great idea. I always think you want to promote what you want, and telling people that LRT is coming, start riding a bike so you can manage that time. I think it's a great way to promote cycling.
Thank you. Yep.
Expanding off of that, I absolutely support the LRT and the chaos that it is going to bring, and we need to bring biking out of that. Our biggest challenge is going to be, as I'm hearing, it's actually being thrown on the table to remove some of those bike lanes to accommodate a higher density of cars. That can kibosh that promotion of biking through this chaos and through the clarity and taking us, keep those biking lanes pure and open.
Okay. I want to throw one more out before we wrap it up, and that is the third rail of Hamilton politics, as these 2 panelists well know, are one of my great pet peeves, which is 5-lane, one-way streets that act like highways through the heart of inner city neighborhoods. And it also strikes me that thinking differently about that is very much compatible with thinking about safe cycling and safe walking and how do we calm traffic and all that kind of stuff. And I just wonder, where does that fit in the future of your 2 visions around improving what we've got here for cyclists?
I would say it's changing the narrative. We think about these 5-lane highways as our competitive advantage, that it's really, really great to come into Hamilton because you can get from one end to the other without stopping. And so I think changing the narrative about how we see our competitive advantage, but also how we see bike lanes put in. Right now we put in bike lanes when a street's getting repaved, when there's extra space, when it's not going to impact parking, when it's not going to impact driver speeds. We need to change the thinking about how we approach our street design. And so I think it's a really interesting comparison between what we're currently thinking is our competitive advantage and how we need to start thinking about it.
Perhaps we should start partnering with brake pad companies. Get them to start lobbying for changing the... Okay, I'm sorry. If a lot of the problems with managing the flow of car traffic during LRT construction and once LRT is in place, the real problem is westbound car traffic, and specifically sort of from Queen Street west to the 403. So there's a really, really, really obvious way to solve that decisively for everybody, and that is if the street right beside King Street was a 2-way street. It's 5 lanes all barreling eastbound. Now it's 2-way west of Paradise, and it's 2-way east of the Delta. But this section in the middle here, the city's newest transportation master plan actually broaches the idea of maybe talking about making Main Street 2-way, but only the east end, and only like for a few blocks like east of, I think, Wellington or Wentworth or something. And and only if council is like really, really, like it's so it's so sort of tepid, and I don't criticize staff for that. Council has made it perfectly clear that they consider making Main Street 2A to be just an unthinkable sort of verboten taboo, and I don't understand that for the life of me. I mean, if you want to have some fun, go to the city public library and log in with your library card. You can read free Hamilton Spectator archives going back to 1990. Go back and read all the letters to the editor around 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, leading up to when James Street was converted to 2A.
The apocalypse was coming.
Oh,
remember it
cats
well.
and dogs living together, mass hysteria. It was going to be, it's going to be total gridlock. You're going to kill the last businesses. No one's going to go downtown. Like it was all of these predictions of chaos and doom. And this is sort of what I was getting at a little bit earlier about how we actually have examples here in Hamilton of success stories, and we need to get better at telling our own stories. Turning Main Street into a two-way street would solve so many problems, including solving problems for drivers. And I think we need to do a better job of explaining that this is a solution that benefits everybody, and it takes the pressure off those bike lanes on Dundurn, which, even though they're not particularly good as bike lanes, one thing that they do is they provide a physical buffer for people on the sidewalk, and that's important to preserve. I mean, walking on the side on a 3-foot sidewalk next inches away from cars driving by is not a pleasant experience, and so we need to think holistically about how do we create a street where walking and cycling and transit all support and reinforce each other, and not thinking about how do we, they shouldn't be pitted in competition. It should be a comprehensive look.
And for those who are more recent arrivals to Hamilton, the context on James Street is this was a 3-lane southbound arterial truck route, and the defenders at the time and the city's traffic department said it was because we needed to get truck traffic from Burlington Street west of the 403, and that any change here would be damaging to that transportation infrastructure. And of course, if you look at the street today and compare it to what it looked like in 1990, there's no resemblance in terms of vitality, how it functions, and the contribution it makes, not the least of which is a healthier tax base for the city of Hamilton. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so I want to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank the folks who helped us put this together, particularly Michael Parente, who's been working the sound over here from HCF, Alan Enriquez and Grace Diffie. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is the first in a series of conversations that we hope to have around vital issues in Hamilton. We hope that you will be part of that. If you have suggestions about content and substance and speakers, we'd love to hear from you. But thanks for coming this morning, and let me ask you to join me in thanking Ryan and Kate for really thoughtful presentations. And there's lots of coffee, muffins, and if anybody wants to grab a takeout latte, it's on us. Enjoy. Have a great day, guys.